And I fear that what I saw on the streets of London yesterday is not something that there's no antidote of, well, let's just have a unit in grade 4 where they'll study the Holocaust. I'm sorry, that's not going to change the mind of 100,000 people and probably 1 million more cheering them on who deeply hate Jews and want the Jewish state eradicated. Ezra Levant here. I'm standing in London, England. Behind me, Westminster Abbey, a church where kings and queens have been crowned, royal weddings and funerals. It's the heart of England, this ancient place with a history going back centuries, millennia even. It's a Christian history, it's a history of the West, it's the history of North America, which emanated from the British Empire. It's the history of our language, it's the history of Winston Churchill, our notions of freedom of speech and the rule of law, the Magna Carta dating back to 1215. But what I've learned over the last few days is that the England of the past, the England that informs our present, I think it's in decline. There's this social media meme going on. It's really funny. Girls or women ask each other, ask your boyfriend how often he thinks of the Roman Empire. How many times a week does he think of the Roman Empire?
Or just how many times in general do you think about the Roman Empire?
Probably not a lot. Why?
Not a lot? When was the last time you thought about it?
Maybe a week or two ago.
And they're stunned when their boyfriends say things like every week or every day. And it's sort of funny, and I'm not sure how true it is, but when you think about it, the Roman Empire and the British Empire, well, we think about them all the time, even if we don't know we do, because everything we do and say and think and how we organize ourselves and interact with each other came from the British Empire. And that in some ways came from the Roman Empire before it. Londinium is where I'm standing. But empires rise and fall. And I think that the British Empire, while of course it has been decolonized and has been in decline in some ways for a century, what I saw this weekend showed that England itself is being colonized. And I'm not using colonized as a byword for just immigration. There have always been immigrants to England. If you think about the empire itself, it was a multicultural, multiracial, global enterprise. One of my favorite poets, Rudyard Kipling, was born in India. He wrote the Jungle Book. If you can imagine what the port of London was like, and other ports, 400 years ago when Shakespeare was writing. I mean, they had the adventures to America and to India. I'm not talking about immigration. I'm talking about colonization, because what I saw on the streets of London yesterday were 100,000 people marching under a foreign flag. I spent hours on the street, and then I looked at social media for hours later. The only British flag, the only Union Jack I saw all day were held by some Nigerian Christian tourists who were in a group. Other than that, I didn't see a single British flag. I saw hundreds of Palestinian flags. I saw some darker flags, which I don't quite know. They looked like they may be an Islamic State flag or something. I don't know definitively. But even without the flags, what I saw is a loyalty to a religion and a political movement that was completely un-British, that had nothing to do with the rule of law or King Charles, that was calling for, as Hamas does, Sharia law, that preaches violence. That's what the Hamas Charter does. It made me profoundly sad that although the British Empire has, I suppose, been in decline for a century, Britain itself was still Britain. And I think what scares me about this colonization is not that these people are in the main of a different religion or a different race. I should say about a quarter of the marchers were hardcore left-wing indigenous Brits, white post-Christian Brits. But 3/4 of them were people who came here and had a cultural value that made them celebrate the barbarity of the Hamas attacks. And I asked a number of protesters if they would just simply describe Hamas as a terrorist group or not. I spoke to one British fellow, I'm not sure if he did, but the Muslim folks I spoke to just refused to answer that question. They are trying to take the words of the Holocaust and flip them around on the Jews. The Jews are committing a Holocaust. The Jews are the new Nazis. The Jews are committing a genocide, undermining the truth about the history of the Jews and weaponizing the anti-Semitism in London. I would be terrified if I was a British Jew. I think that Britain's on the same path as France, where synagogues have to be guarded by soldiers around the clock with submachine guns, and where there are violent attacks on Jews on the street all the time. We're starting to see a little bit of that in the UK and even in Canada. And I don't know, I'm glad, I guess I was born when I was, that I could have gotten to know London, even if it's in global decline. I'm sure Rome in its final years was still a wonderful place. The best restaurants, the best museums. I mean, imagine all the antiquities that were brought from the Roman Empire to Rome. You can still see some of them now. But I fear that the UK, because of its essential politeness, isn't calling out some atrocious things on the street. When I saw a picture of tens of thousands of people on the Westminster Bridge, and there were other bridges, all of them flying a foreign flag, all of them calling for violence against Israel, smash the terror state was what the socialist workers put on their pamphlets, I couldn't help but think of what it would have been like in 1930s here. There were some Nazi sympathizers in London during the 30s. They were very careful to say they were not for violence, and they claimed they were not anti-Semitic. They were very careful about it. They just admired Hitler. He was getting things back on track for Germany, and wasn't he charismatic? And the economy was booming under him. But even in the 1930s, the pro-Nazi Brits, and there were a few, were extremely careful to avoid or even to condemn some of the excesses that were visible at the time of Hitler. Not so here. We spoke to a few media-savvy Muslim protesters who tried to dance around these questions. I think they were putting on a liberal face. I think most of the protesters were simply regurgitating the propaganda lines put to them, or truly would say, yes, from the river to the sea, drive every Jew out. That is the Hamas charter. That's what the chant from the river to the sea means. And I remember when I was in elementary school, we learned about something called the Golden Age of Jews in Spain. And it ended in 1492 with the Inquisition and the expulsion of the Jews. But there was this time, a period of decades, even centuries, where a Jew in Spain had many rights and had great freedom. And I think that was the way in Germany until the 30s. It was great to be a Jew in Berlin. Jews were very successful. Half the doctors in Berlin were Jewish. Imagine how the Nuremberg laws affected that city. And I feel like I was born in the golden age for Jews in America, in Canada. I mean, what a lucky and easy childhood I had. Never did I ever feel in any risk or any threat, and I genuinely felt that there was nothing in the country I couldn't do, no goal I couldn't aspire to. And while the mass rally of 100,000 neo-Nazis, speaking Arabic instead of German, 100,000 neo-Nazis flying the new swastika, and the left is all in favor of it, and the center is afraid of it, and all the polite Brits don't want to make a fuss. And it reminds me of Kipling's poem. And remember, Kipling was born in India, and he loved the Indian people. The stranger within my gate, he may be true or kind, but he does not talk my talk. I cannot feel his mind. I see the face and the eyes and the mouth, but not the soul behind. I'll read a little bit more, but that reminds me of that young woman that David Menzies found in Mississauga. She looks lovely, actually. She looks friendly, she's beautiful, she's young. And by the way, I don't know if she still works there, she works at a normal store. Like, she's not a professional activist. And I'm sure she has colleagues of different races and religions. But when things hit the fan, she said anything Hamas did is justified. Here's a little clip reminding you of that.
Including what happened last week?
Every single thing they have done is justified.
Ma'am, there were children murdered, there were babies beheaded.
Babies beheaded, really?
Let me read a little more of the poem. The men of my own stock, they may do ill or well, but they tell the lies I am wanted to, and they are used to the lies I tell. And we do not need interpreters when we go to buy or sell. And here's the terrifying line, and this was written 100 years ago, but it's how I felt yesterday watching 100,000 people brave for the murder of the Jews. Now, they didn't say murder the Jews. They said it in code. They said from the river to the sea. Basically, get every Jew out of Israel. Oh, and by the way, Hamas says get every Jew out of everywhere. Here's the poem. Here's the stanza in the poem that terrifies me. The stranger within my gates, he may be evil or good, but I cannot tell what powers control, what reasons sway his mood, nor when the gods of his far-off land shall repossess his blood. I'm not looking or expecting everyone to support Israel, or I'm not looking for Muslims to love Jews or for people to support Benjamin Netanyahu, who's a divisive figure even within Israel. But I had a feeling deep in my bones that here in, well, I'm here in London, but also in North America and in Canada, we had some basic common ground, some civic nationalism, if you will, where we all sort of agreed murder is bad, rape is bad, torture is bad, kidnapping of civilian hostages is bad, and those things are bad. We had a basic understanding. And so if you and I disagreed about something, whether it was Palestine or Russia or Ukraine or what the GST should be, we would have a commonality. And even if we were mean to each other, there was a basis upon which we had a unity, a basis, a kind of social contract that we knew we could understand each other. And what Kipling's writing, and I'm not going to read the whole poem, what Kipling is saying is that there are wonderful people of every background there who may be kind and good and noble and tremendous. But maybe every once in a while something happens and it reveals a deep underlying incompatibility. And I fear that what I saw on the streets of London yesterday is not something that can be, there's no antidote of, well, let's just have a unit in grade 4 where they'll study the Holocaust. I'm sorry, that's not going to change the mind of 100,000 people and probably 1 million more cheering them on who deeply hate Jews and want the Jewish state eradicated. This isn't a matter of haggling over details or compromise. I think it is a deep incompatibility. And I'm not saying that about all Muslims or of all socialists. There were, like I say, about a quarter of the people there were communists and socialists. I'm saying there are some people who we've let into the UK and into Canada and the United States who have not come to be a part of Canada and the United States, to integrate and to assimilate, even bringing with them their religions. I think they have come, as another man that David Menzies interviewed a few years ago said. Let me remind you of an incredible interview that David Menzies did at an Al-Quds Day protest in Toronto. Let the man speak for himself. Take a look at this.
So would you like to see Sharia law in Canada replace Canadian law?
At some point it will. You know, because we have families, we are making babies. You're not. Your population is going down the slump, right? Yeah. By 2060, Muslims will be the biggest religious group the world over. Right. What are you going to do then? Actually, are you going to oppose Sharia even then? Because we owe our allegiance and our loyalty first and foremost to our religion, not to the Queen, to be honest. When I went for my so-called oath, I was silent, I didn't say anything. It was your responsibility to make sure you got it out of me.
Did you see that? He's a colonizer. He's the imperialist now. He says that when the numbers are there, Sharia law will rule. He said he was silent in his citizenship ceremony when he was supposed to make the oath. He said, it was on you to make me say the oath. I have many Muslim friends, including on the board of our company, our staff. I've had Muslim friends since I was in high school. I consider myself very lucky to have met Muslims when they were a very small part of the community, and I made true friendships with them. I agree with some and disagree with others on different politics, but I'm afraid, even if it's only a portion of these migrants, that a terrible thing was awakened when that barbaric attack on Israel happened. Let me clarify and close with this. I'm not asking for the Muslims or the Arabs or the Palestinians of London or even of Canada to share my views on the future state of affairs in the Middle East. I'm not asking for that. I'm not even asking for them to love Jews as Christians love others. But what terrifies me is that so many of them, like that man at the Al-Quds rally or that woman in Mississauga, on the outside they look friendly and Canadian, and they're drinking their Tim Hortons and they're working beside colleagues of every background. But every once in a while, the mask drops and an absolutely terrifying anti-Semitism reveals itself. I'm afraid of it, and I don't know what to do. I think the first thing you do is you stop making it worse. I think new immigrants to the West should be asked basic questions about cultural compatibility. Do you believe in pluralism, in nonviolent solutions to problems, in the equality of men and women? Do you believe in the separation of mosque and state, and the separation of church and state? I think that we've let in too many people who have not been asked to become British or to become Canadian. We don't say integrate or assimilate anymore. We say include, inclusion. Canada has to do the changing, not the newcomers. This trip, I'm here because I was invited to attend the ARC conference that Jordan Peterson and others have convened later this week. It's sort of an antidote to the World Economic Forum. There are wonderful, brilliant people in London, and I hope there always will be. It's one of the world's greatest cities, and there's amazing thinkers and doers here. But there's definitely two Londons. There's the London of Shakespeare and Parliament and the history and the Magna Carta, but then there is a new London, and we saw it on the streets yesterday. For Rebel News, I'm Ezra Levant. One of our ideas is that people who actually promote the Hamas terrorist group should be sent home if they're not citizens. I think that's a pretty basic building block. If you agree with us, go to deporthamas.com to sign our petition.